Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Apologize for the slight delay. The senator is a little busy, but he's going to be on in 1 minute. So we were just waiting for him. I'm Marsha Gordon. I'm the president and CEO of the Business Council of Westchester. And what an honor it is this morning to have Senator Schumer here for the second time at the KeyBank Speaker Series. This is truly historic and a tremendous honor and couldn't be more timely. So we are awaiting him. He will be here in about a minute. But in the meantime, we have some very special people to introduce. First of all, I do want to acknowledge Heidi Davidson, who's the chair of our board. And I know Heidi is on. And also, good morning, Senator Schumer. Welcome. Good morning. And also George Lenz, the Vice Chair of Governmental Action for the Business Council of Westchester. So thank you both for your great leadership. And it's my pleasure now to introduce John Manginelli, the President of the Hudson Valley Metro New York Market and Northeast Regional Executive for KeyBank Real Estate Capital. John, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Marsha. I truly appreciate the opportunity to say a few words on behalf of KeyBank. As Marsha mentioned, I'm John Manginelli, the market president for Keys, Hudson Valley, and Metro New York Market. It's a tremendous pleasure to once again welcome you to the KeyBank Speaker Series presented by the Business Council of Westchester. Key is a longtime member and supporter of the BCW and has been sponsoring this event series for many years, because supporting local business is key to our business and the economic health and well-being of our community. KeyBank is the bank of choice to so many businesses of all sizes in Westchester, and this speaker series is considered one of the hallmark business programs in the market. It's important that businesses and local legislators work in tandem, and these BCW conversations help drive that collaboration. I truly want to congratulate Marsha and John for always bringing relevant and insightful guest speakers to the table, particularly someone of caliber of today's guest, Senate Majority Chuck Schumer. We are truly privileged and fortunate to have Mr. Schumer spend some time with us. Senator Schumer brings a much wider lens to the discussion. And like all of you, we are very anxious to hear his views on the direction of our nation and how it will impact our economy. Thank you so much for joining us today, and please enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, John. Thank you for the commitment of KeyBank to the community, to the business community, and especially to the small business community. You are a true partner to so many businesses in Westchester. It's my honor now to introduce my colleague, John Ravitz, the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Business Council of Westchester. John?
Thank you, Marsha. Good morning, and thank you everyone for being here, and especially to our Majority Leader, Senator Charles Schumer. Folks, just so you know, the Senator is probably in one of the most intense schedules that Washington has ever seen, but he's given us his time to be with us today. We did ask everyone to send us questions to the Senator, and we got a lot of questions. I'm going to come back after the Senator's presentation to ask him a few, but if time does not permit us to ask all questions, we will be sending those questions to the Senator's office so that he can review them and get back to you with a response. A special thanks to Meg Gladner, who is the Senator's Regional Director, for helping us, and she's been a great partner and a great representative to the Majority Leader for Westchester and the Hudson Valley. And Marsha, I'll turn it back over to you to introduce the Majority Leader.
Excellent, and what an honor it is. Senator Schumer, we've worked together for many, many years, and we couldn't be more proud of your great and important leadership for our country. U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer has dedicated his career to being a tireless fighter for New York. He visits all 62 counties every year and has delivered countless victories, both large and small, across the state, including securing hundreds of millions of dollars for Westchester and our businesses. Senator Schumer was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, yay, like me, and where his dad owned a small exterminating business. He attended public school before heading to Harvard University and then Harvard Law School. Prior to his election to the US Senate, Mr. Schumer was a three-term member of the New York State Assembly from 1975 to 1980 and served in the US House of Representatives from 1981 to 1990. He was reelected for a fourth term by the people of New York, and his colleagues elected him to serve as the Senate's Democratic leader, the first time a New Yorker has held the position. Throughout his career, Senator Schumer has been a champion of economic development in Westchester County and New York through business investment, job creation, and workforce development across various sectors. Most recently, Senator Schumer served as the lead negotiator of the COVID-19 relief bills, which we shared all that information, Senator, believe me, including the historic American Rescue Plan. These bills provided over $355 million to the Westchester County government, preventing a countywide tax hike, and over $250 million to our municipalities. Senator Schumer also included billions of dollars in these bills for economic development and businesses, and through the SBA's Restaurant Revitalization Funds, the Shuttered Venue Operators Fund grants, PPP, EIDL, EDA grants, and more, including, I will say, Senator, thank you for allowing Broadway to reopen. With that said, it's my honor to turn this over to Senator Chuck Schumer.
Well, thank you, Marsha. And first, thank you for all the great work you do with the Business Council of Westchester. You've done a great, great job all the years I've known you, and sticking up for businesses. I also want to thank John Ravitz, a fellow assembly member, and I know you've worked very, very hard, John, to help both you and Marsha, to help the 1,000 members of the Business Council and help our small businesses, medium-sized businesses through these struggles. I also want to thank John Manginelli and KeyBank for hosting this series. And to all the Westchester-based businesses and nonprofits on Zoom, thanks. Thank you for taking the time to be here. As Marsha mentioned, my dad was a small businessman. I saw how small business people struggled because he had a little exterminating business. He was, he wanted to go to college, couldn't, circumstances didn't let him. And, he would pace the floor Sunday nights at 2 a.m. because he hated going to work Monday morning. And I saw how business people struggled, and I have in my heart, every business I see and go to, I say, how are you doing? How are you doing? And when they say good, I feel good. And when they say bad, I feel bad. I guess empathizing with my father's situation. Now, the good news is he's now 98. He's in decent health. He retired when he was 70. He's a funny guy. He says, I was an exterminator. I'm 98. How bad could DDT have been? So I really have sympathy and empathy for small business people. So let me go over some of the things that have happened in Washington that we were able to do. As you know, New York is in my bones, in the macro sense. When I go to DC, and I'm the first majority leader ever in New York's history, I always look out for New York. That's just who I am. As Marsha mentioned, I visit every county every year. COVID hasn't stopped me. I've done 59 of the 62 this year. And I love mixing, mingling, talking to people. And that's how I learn. That's how I learn what's on people's minds, what's going on, what they care about. And then I try to take that grassroots activities and translate it into action in Washington using my position as majority leader to do it. So there are a lot of things we've been able to do for Westchester businesses. I'm going to go through some of those. First, right away, I want to talk a little bit about Ida. I was in Westchester the day after Ida, and I saw the damage that residents and business owners had as a direct result of Ida. Now, I just want to remind people there is FEMA assistance available. The deadline is Monday, December 6th, and there's small business assistance available. There's business to individuals and homeowners. I made sure that SBA came with boots on the ground. They came and visited, and you can call my Hudson Valley office if you need more help with information on how to apply. We visited the terrible flooding in Mamaroneck by the river. And now we've been able to free up some funds that will be able to make corrections so that doesn't happen again. Now, as everybody knows, I was the lead negotiator of all the COVID bills in Washington, first when the Republicans, Trump and McConnell, were in charge, and now when we were in charge. And I'm especially proud, Marsha mentioned this, we got $355 million directly to Westchester County government and $250 million for its municipalities. I insisted the localities get some money as well. Often when the money goes to the state, they never see it. And so we gave the state all the money it needed, so it didn't have a deficit over $23 billion. But we made sure that the counties got money in different tranches. And that, as Marsha said, prevented tax increases, prevented layoffs, prevented a cutback in city services. So I was very glad about that. And I also made sure, I know not a lot of nonprofits are on the Zoom here. Originally, the PPP program, which sent over $1 trillion out to small businesses, was only intended, Republicans wanted it just for for-profits. I said, our nonprofits are just as vital to our economy as our for-profits. They employ people, they provide services, they do the things that are needed. So I made sure that the nonprofits were included as well. So let me talk about some of the things coming up. First, the BIF. In August, as you know, the Senate passed a long overdue infrastructure package. This is the bipartisan infrastructure framework. And it makes historic investments in traditional infrastructure, in roads and bridges and rail, in water and sewer, the things we've always invested in, but we've fallen behind. The federal government in the 20th century used to take a good chunk of the money, pay a good chunk of the proportion. That declined after 2000, and our localities didn't have the money to keep up for all the obvious reasons. So now we're making this historic investment. New York's infrastructure will get investments just about in every sector. There's $110 billion for roads, bridges, and major infrastructure projects, with $40 billion for bridge repair, replacement, and rehabilitation, $11 billion for transportation safety. New York will get about $89 billion for transit, $10 billion for the MTA and Metro North. I make sure that we are the largest rail system in the country, both with our subways in New York City and our commuter rail like Metro North in the suburbs, and I made sure they were included. We also got $59 billion for rail infrastructure. $24 billion of that will go to the Northeast Corridor, and it's going to help projects like Penn Access. I've always fought to connect Westchester's Sound Shore communities to Penn Station, and we got a key environmental approval from the FRA, the Federal Rail Administration, last month. We also get money to our airports, $937 million for New York airports. JFK gets $294, $150 for LaGuardia, but Westchester Airport gets $22 million. Other things that are in the BIF that I think are important. This is the bill that was on the floor last night. It didn't pass, but I believe it will pass next week, with both bills passing, the BIF and the Build Back Better, which I'll get to in a minute. But in the BIF bill, the BIF has already passed the Senate, the Build Back Better hasn't. But in the BIF, there's $65 billion for broadband infrastructure. We believe every home, every business, everyone should have broadband. A lot of rural areas don't. That's true even in the Hudson Valley. I don't think it's true in many parts of Westchester, but some. And electricity was a necessity in the 1930s. Franklin Roosevelt said every home was going to get wired, and it brought rural America back. We believe the same thing for the 21st century with broadband. There's $17 billion for port infrastructure. There's $7.5 billion for zero and low emission buses and ferries, $7.5 billion for a nationwide EV electric vehicle charging network, $65 billion to rebuild the electric grid. We're getting clean energy through wind and solar, but the energy often isn't where the people are. So we need to upgrade the grid. That hasn't been done. It will be. There's $55 billion for water infrastructure, both water and sewer. really important, and great money for resiliency. In other words, we've seen with Ida, we've seen with the recent storms and flooding and the fires out west, global warming is affecting our communities, and we need much greater resiliency, particularly here in Westchester, to protect us from drought and floods. We have that, and there's money for cyber attacks. I don't know how many of your businesses, the larger ones, may be susceptible to ransomware. We put in some real money to help businesses upgrade there. So, and then there's 21 billion to clean up Superfund and brownfield sites. So that's a lot of money across the board. And that's the traditional. But then there's the Build Back Better. Why this was done in two pieces? Well, we want to try to do as much as we can on a bipartisan basis. And our Republican colleagues were willing to invest in traditional infrastructure, but not in climate or things that help families adjust. So Build Back Better focuses on climate investments, and helping American workers and families. One of the main things that's in Build Back Better is workforce development. As you know, we're short of workers. There are a lot of reasons for that. One is immigration, but another is just we don't have training. We have vacant jobs, but people who aren't trained for them. In the Build Back Better bill is $40 billion for worker training. It increases Pell Grants, of course, but a lot in workforce development, community college workforce programs, sector-based training for thousands of workers, registered apprenticeships, and helping businesses train people. A lot of our smaller businesses don't have the wherewithal to do that. This will give them help. The workforce development programs are increased, they're increased more than 50% in the next 5 years. In terms of clean energy, we have the largest single investment in clean energy ever. It's a bold move. It's an investment in American manufacturing and leadership, but in climate change, so we can work together to deal with climate change. So between the strong workforce provisions, manufacturing tax credits, and industrial grant and loan programs, it's going to catalyze a green industrial revolution, helping our businesses adapt, giving them help to adapt to all of this. Paired with the investments that will ensure every American has a cleaner, healthier home, lower utility bills, it's a watershed moment. And there's also, of course, a great deal of subsidy for water power, solar power, and wind power. So that they become available, as well as for electric vehicles. There will be a point of sale rebate if you turn in your internal combustion engine and get an electric vehicle, or eventually a hydrogen vehicle, a clean vehicle, and tax breaks. So anyone who has one of these can build a charging station by their home, in addition to the federal government building charging stations on many, many more of our highways. That's very important as well. We also fund deployment of cleaner transit, buses and trucks, and grants, of course, to deal with environmental justice. So there's lots of these types of investments. Childcare and preschool, we would have preschool 3 to 4 year olds across the country. This is the studies show when kids get early education, they're much, much more productive citizens later on. And childcare is a definite need. That's probably, the economists tell us, the number one reason there's a shortage of labor is a lack of good childcare. Let me just go over that for a minute. When I was a kid, my dad, as I said, had this junky little exterminating business. My mom was what was called a housewife. She stayed home. Every day I got home from school, there was milk and cookies. Oh, do you have homework? Yeah, Mom, I have homework. Oh, you can go out and play, come back at 6 and do your homework, that kind of thing. But when something happened in everyday life, the car broke down, someone got sick, there was a funeral, someone had to travel, there was always one parent home. These days, only 16%, 1/6 of the families with kids are 2 parents with one working. They're either single parent or 2 parents working. And childcare is a huge burden on these folks. It often costs $10,000, $15,000 a year. Well, if you're making $300,000 a year, you can afford it. But if you're making $50,000, it's a nightmare. And so and when any of these little events happen, that happen in all of our lives all the time, the family just goes through real trouble. Furthermore, since in the old days, so many of the families lived near each other, there were grandparents, uncles, aunts to watch the kids. In our fast-moving society, that's hardly true anymore for many people. So there's a real need for childcare, and what the bill provides is that there be a 7%, you have to pay 7% of your income for childcare. So and you have to, of course, be working. So no one's gonna, this is not gonna be, people are gonna have to pay for it. But it's not so much of a cost. If you make $50,000, you pay $3,500 a year. The government helps pick the rest for quality childcare. There's also similar help to expand high quality home care for seniors and people with disabilities. That's another great burden in our society, taking care of your elderly parents. They're living much longer. We all want them to live as long as possible, but they often need help. There is very little help, or it's very expensive. We deal with that issue. On healthcare, we reduce premiums for 9 million Americans to buy insurance through the ACA marketplace. That's going to help a lot of our people who don't have healthcare and businesses who rely on ACA. And we cut taxes by for low wage and middle wage workers by expanding the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit. So if you make below 150,000 as a couple, 75,000 as an individual, you'll get some help raising your kids because, again, the expenses are great and people are struggling. There are other issues there as well. A couple of other Westchester mentions, and then we'll open it up to your questions. We're pushing for millions of funding for the new Rochelle link from DOT. That's it used to be called a Tiger grant. Now it's called a RAISE grant. I've called Secretary Buttigieg to help New Rochelle get that link, which will really help downtown New Rochelle. And just last week, I secured language in the Senate Appropriations Bill for $2 million for Westchester County's emergency radio system, $990,000 to upgrade St. George Riverside's maternal health unit, and $1.5 million to help Mount Vernon address its sewage crisis. So when there are communities that have needs and troubles, when there are businesses that have needs and troubles, I always try to be there. I tell people I'm like the Brooklyn Car Service. You can call me if you need me. Brooklyn Car Service is called 449-1111, always available. That's what I try to be. So call me when you need me. I'm involved, obviously, in all the big issues, but I always want to help at the local level, our local communities, our local businesses, our local nonprofits. So with that, Marsha or John, who's ever doing the Q&A, I'm ready to roll.
Thank you very much, Senator, and thank you for that update. And again, we know you're on a time-sensitive schedule, so we do have a few questions. And as I said at the beginning, thank all of you for sending your questions into this majority leader. We will send them to his office so that they will be reviewed by both the senator and his staff. But Senator, obviously, look, we're in these final days of negotiating, both obviously the infrastructure and the Build Back Better package. You're the leader of a conference of men and women who represent different parts of the state. Obviously, we've heard mostly about two members of the conference who have played a role in this process. But I'm curious, and we got a lot of questions about this. As a leader, the skills now that you have to do every time you walk into that room, because you have members who are concerned about not spending enough. You have members who are concerned about spending too much. Your role as majority leader, how have you had to navigate that? And all of your years in public service, what skills have you really had to tap into to get through the day every day?
Okay, well, let me say a few things here. First, it is a very difficult job. When you have only 50 votes and a large, important agenda put forward by your president, and the 50 votes run from Bernie Sanders to Joe Manchin, it's not easy. I tell people this is the hardest job I've ever had. And you also have, in many instances, intransigence on the Republican side. It's not the Republican Party that you had when you were there, John. Donald Trump, candidly, doesn't want to see any successes. And so even on things like debt ceiling, he's encouraging people to let it lapse. So it's hard. I tell people this is the hardest job I've ever had. But I have more energy and more enthusiasm for it than any job I've had because it's so damn important. So how do I manage it? Well, it's a little like a business. I have an executive team. We meet from every Monday, excuse me, at 4:45. And on that executive team of 10, and we plot out the week, excuse me, just gotta get a tissue. Excuse me one sec.
No worries.
I got home late last night and I was on the phone till 2 a.m. So anyway, so on my leadership team of 10, which plot out things, are Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, our two most progressive senators, and Joe Manchin and Mark Warner, our two most conservative senators. And I have 3 rules on that team. 1, respect each other. Don't call each other names. Don't say this one's a sellout, that one has no courage. Respect. Number 2, walk in the other person's shoes. Joe Manchin is from West Virginia. West Virginia is the second most pro-Republican state in the country, pro-Trump. Trump got 70% of the vote. And so if Joe Manchin goes back to West Virginia and says, I'm for the Democratic agenda, it's a loser for him. So he says, I'm trying to be bipartisan. That's fair. He's done that for 10 years. You have to respect that. Now, in some cases, as this Build Back Better, bipartisanship doesn't work, but respect it. But third and most important rule, in unity, we have strength. When you have 50 votes and you're not getting help on the other side, which we get sometimes, by the way, of the 6 big bills we passed this year, 3, including the BIF, the first one, have been that I mentioned, have been bipartisan. So I always try to be bipartisan whenever we can, but sometimes you can't. Anyway, in unity is our strength. When we're together, we can get things done. Each member could say, unless I get my way, I'm not voting for it, and we're cooked. So we try to do that. Now, there's a second secret weapon I have to bring the caucus together. Here it is. I have a flip phone. I talk to people all the time. I have memorized the phone number of every one of my 49 Democratic colleagues and a few Republican ones. And they have mine. I talk constantly, talk to each other, tell people what you think. Don't hold back, be respectful, but don't hold back. And so far, we've had unity on just about everything. Everyone's had a compromise. Now, in reference to your question about deficits, what we're doing in this bill is paying for the whole thing. The first BIF bill, ironically, that was bipartisan, paid for about half of it. Now it's infrastructure. Some people don't think you have to pay for it, but our Republican colleagues didn't want to see any tax increases. This bill is paid for. They've tried to do it in a way that affects only the wealthiest people and the highest end businesses. Biden had a rule, no one below $400,000 should get any tax increase. We've stuck with that. So that's the majority of citizens, even in a more affluent county like Westchester. And the economists tell us, Mark Zandi, Republican, says it doesn't increase inflation if you pay for it. In the past, we've not paid for things. This is something we should do. And one final thing I'd say to this, some of our inflation is caused by bottlenecks, because of COVID. And a lot of it is caused by workforce shortages, which you've all seen in your businesses, large and small. If we do these bills and train many more workers and provide more workers with the ability to enter the labor force, that may actually reduce inflation if we pay for it.
Thank you for that. I want to shift gears a little bit to another topic that the Business Council of Westchester has been laser focused, and that is our changing energy landscape. As you know, in Westchester County, Indian Point is closed. There's still a gas moratorium imposed on the southern part of the county. And when we look globally, the UK, if not Europe as a whole, is struggling with green energy production, natural gas transmission, and skyrocketing prices. Here in the US, we are seeing a dramatic rise in energy prices as we head into the potentially tough heating season, and significant increases in energy costs will squeeze the budgets of consumers and business owners alike. What steps can you and your colleagues take to lower energy prices in the short term, and in the long term, how will the proposed infrastructure and reconciliation bills impact the availability, transmissions, and price of energy? And most importantly, are you concerned that New York might have a reliability problem if the state doesn't have the renewable infrastructure put in place over the next few years?
Yeah, well, this is a very serious issue. We all know that the price of gasoline has gone up and some of those have gone up. And there are some people mainly from the oil industry, but others as well, who say, look, just increase production of carbon-dominated fuels. If we do that, the damage our society will pay will be far greater than the problems we have now. Now, it may be 2, 3, 4 years down the road. But if you just look at the flooding that was occurred in the last few months, the wildfires out west, global warming is going to get much worse, much worse. And COVID was terrible. But I would say to my friends here and everybody else, if we don't deal with the climate crisis, starting 3, 4 years from now, every year will be worse than COVID. The discombobulation that will be caused by changes in weather, changes even in food and agriculture and things like that will be enormous. So we've got to deal with this issue, and we can't just run away from it, to turn the clock back, or just keep things on hold. So, but we do have to make sure, as you rightly point out in your question, John, that if we're going to be green, we've got to make sure that there are no bottlenecks, that there is ample energy supply. And what we have done in this bill is not just given tax breaks for the production of energy, but we have also given significant tax breaks and funding for the transmission and the availability of energy. We cannot afford, obviously, to have a total lack of energy. And so we're very mindful of that. So we make huge investments in the electric grid. We make huge investments in energy storage, and the experts that we've feel that by 2030, we will be able to have more energy available at just as good, if not a better price. And part of that is because the federal government is subsidizing at least the transmission and storage of energy, and research into that, as well as application of that. So I think it's not easy. Global warming is not an easy phenomenon, and we've ignored it for too long. And we're just beginning to see the huge damages that are coming from it. They'll get worse if we don't do something. So the answer is to realize we need available energy, but to also focus on trying to make it as green as possible, as soon as possible. Now, I will say this, Joe Manchin, who one of the reasons he's held up this bill, he has a different view. He comes from the coal-producing state of West Virginia, and he's knocked out some of the things we'd want to put in there. But there are substitutes that work just as good and just as well, excuse me. PS 197, my teachers wouldn't have liked it if I said just as good. But I think we've had a pretty good mix here. And I think when you look at the bill and see what we've done, I think most people will be quite happy with it, because it sort of tries to cut the Gordian knot by going green, but making sure there's available energy. And that takes some real investment. This is the largest investment in green energy ever in America. It's over $500 billion. It is the biggest piece of this bill.
And we'll continue to work with you and your staff on this project. And we have our annual energy conference coming up on December 15th. So we hope everyone will attend that as well.
Help. Any ideas you have that are specific to Westchester, I'm happy to look at them.
Thank you very much. We have time for one more question. And this is one that I felt I had to ask, because this is someone who has obviously been following your career for some time. In your 2007 published book, Positively American, Winning Back the Middle Class Majority, One Family at a Time, you warned the Democratic Party about drifting too far from the middle and losing the, quote, message war, unquote, to the Republican Party. So it's 14 years later, Senator Schumer, how would you either update your book, if at all, or release it today with everything that you now have experienced over these last few years?
Yeah, well, I think updating it is right. You know, America has always been a bright, sunny, optimistic country, okay? And even when I wrote the book in 2007, the Baileys, who were my fictional middle-class couple, he worked as an insurance salesman, she was a clerical worker at a medical office, were pretty positive about things, although they saw trouble on the horizon. Well, if anything, the middle class now is more worried about the future. Those in the middle class are more worried about staying in it. Those trying to get to the middle class are more worried about getting there. And so what we've seen this rapid change in technology, where wealth tends to agglomerate at the top through no one's fault. In other words, in an ideas economy, wealth doesn't spread as evenly. Let me give you a little thought about that. There were two bookends of the 20th century, excuse me. Henry Ford and Bill Gates each mass produced a big, excuse me, I'm just gonna, I don't want
No worries.
to rasp to you. Okay, so it's Henry Ford and Bill Gates. Each mass produced a product, one a car, one a computer platform. Each became very wealthy. That's our capitalist system. But here's the difference. Ford made something. So he needed to employ a lot of people. And he created, figuratively speaking, 1 million new jobs where people made $10,000 for the first time. But Bill Gates had an idea. He doesn't need a whole lot of people. He comes up with the idea. So he, in a sense, figuratively speaking, created 10,000 new jobs where people made $1 million for the first time. That is a condition of our society. We can't be Luddite and say we don't want new technological breakthroughs, but we have to deal with it. So middle-class families have new struggles. Childcare is one that I mentioned. I didn't mention that in my book because you still had more of the nuclear family. You still had more people. It was bad then, but it's much worse now. Another thing that's happened is that China has become much more of a competitor. And we must invest in the highest cutting-edge jobs that we have in these kinds of things. And in this bill that we passed, bipartisan, called the USICA, U.S. Innovation and Competitive Act, we invest heavily in the new cutting-edge technologies, such as quantum computing, AI, battery storage, communications, biotech, things like that. And when the government invests in those things, it creates lots of good middle-class jobs. Our investment in NIH created millions of jobs in the pharmaceutical and healthcare industries. Our investment in DARPA and NSF created millions of good-paying jobs in tech. Doing that can secure a greater future for the middle class. Doing the worker training more needed now than ever before because, you know, even a welder, up in Rochester, they're short of welders. When I was a kid, a welder was just a visor and a blowtorch. Now you need algebra. So they're short of kids who understand the algebra. And what we're proposing is that our community colleges and even our high schools do these programs aimed at filling those needs. So if you said to a kid, you got to learn algebra, they'd say, why? But if you say to a kid, you learn algebra, and a welding company will guarantee you a job at $45,000 a year, the kid's learning algebra. And so these programs link the schools to the companies that need them. They work together to train them, and the kids do great because they know there's a good job at the end. So there's lots of things we have to do now that we haven't done in the past. But if we don't do it, the middle class could become more and more sour and more worried. And we can't have a sour America. We need a optimistic, sunny America. And that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about trying to get Build Back Better done. I think it will help. It's, you know, the average person doesn't expect us to snap our fingers and make all their troubles go away, but they do expect us to make some progress. And that's what we try to do here.
Well, Majority Leader Charles Schumer, thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing on behalf of New York. Thank you for the work that you're doing on behalf of the country. As always, the
I see in the chat here, one other question, which was an SALT. We are working very hard to get that in the bill. I know how it affects Westchester, average folks, and I'm optimistic about that. Okay.
Thank you for that. And as I said, for all of you who have been putting questions in, we will get them to the senator's office so that they can review that as well. For all of those of you who watched us on Facebook today, thank you very much. This has been recorded, so this will be on the Business Council of Westchester's business resource page for those of you who either came in late or want to share this and the remarks that the Majority Leader gave us this morning. Again, Majority Leader Schumer, thank you. We appreciate your time today in what is, I know, a very, very critical and hectic time for you. So thank you for joining us. We want to thank KeyBank again for their continuing partnership and leadership. And on behalf of Dr. Marsha Gordon and our board chair, Heidi Davidson, and our Government Action Council chair, George Lentz, thank you for joining us today. Have a good weekend and continue to stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend.